The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled Operating Room 7 at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center as surgical nurse Iris Delilah checked the Marine captain's vitals for the third time in 2 minutes. The patient, a 32-year-old force reconnaissance officer, had taken shrapnel from an IED training accident at Quantico, and his blood pressure was dropping faster than she liked. The lead surgeon was trapped in another emergency surgery 3 floors down, leaving Iris and the surgical team in a precarious position. "Pressure's at 90/60 and falling," she announced to the room, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from years of experience. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Rachel, looked up from her monitors with concern etched across her features. They both knew what those numbers meant. The captain was bleeding internally, and waiting for the surgeon could mean losing him. That's when the doors burst open with enough force to make everyone jump. Dr. Mason Carter, the hospital's CEO, stormed into the sterile environment, his face flushed red with the kind of rage that made veins bulge in his neck. "Who authorized the administration of Factor 7 without my explicit approval?" His voice boomed across the operating room, making the junior nurses step back instinctively. Iris straightened from her position beside the patient, meeting his gaze with those steady blue eyes that never seemed to waver. "I did, Dr. Carter. The patient was experiencing severe internal hemorrhaging. Protocol dictates..." "Protocol?" Carter's voice rose to a near shout as he crossed the room in 3 quick strides. "You think you know protocol? You're a nurse. A nurse doesn't make medical decisions in my hospital." His hand shot out, grabbing the collar of her surgical scrubs, yanking her away from the patient with enough force to send surgical instruments clattering to the floor. The room froze. Dr. Rachel's hands hovered over her equipment, trembling slightly. The surgical tech, a young man named David, stood paralyzed with a retractor in his hand. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. They all knew Mason Carter's reputation, the man who had fired 3 department heads in his first month, who ruled through fear and political connections rather than medical expertise. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't Carter's rage. It was Iris's response, or rather her lack of one. As his thick fingers wrapped around her throat, pushing her against the wall, with enough force to knock over a tray of instruments, her body went through a peculiar transformation. For just a fraction of a second, her muscles coiled like springs, every fiber ready to explode into action. Then, deliberately, she went completely limp, allowing him to pin her against the cold tile wall. "You think because you've been here 5 years, you can override a doctor's authority?" Carter's face was inches from hers now, spittle flying with each word. "You're nothing but a glorified assistant who got lucky with a few good calls. But luck doesn't give you the right to play God with my patients in my hospital." Iris's eyes never left his. There was something in those blue depths that made the hair on Dr. Rachel's neck stand up, a calculating coldness that seemed completely at odds with her submissive posture. It was like watching a wolf decide whether a rabbit was worth the energy to chase. "The patient needed immediate intervention," Iris said quietly, her voice steady despite the hand at her throat. "Every second we waited increased the risk of..." Carter's grip tightened, cutting off her words. "I don't care what you think the patient needed. You follow orders, you don't give them. Is that clear?" 20 feet away, hidden partially behind a surgical cart, Nurse Amber was recording everything on her phone, her hands shaking as she captured the assault. She had only been at Walter Reed for 6 months, but she'd already seen Carter's tyrannical behavior drive away some of the best medical professionals she'd ever worked with. But this, physically assaulting a nurse during surgery, this was beyond anything she'd witnessed. "Dr. Carter," Dr. Rachel finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "The patient's pressure is dropping. We need to..." "Shut up," Carter snapped it without looking at her. His attention remained fixed on Iris, who still hadn't struggled, hadn't fought back, hadn't done anything except maintain that unnervingly steady gaze. This one needs to learn her place first. What happened next would become the subject of speculation and rumor throughout the hospital for weeks to come. Iris's hand moved, not quickly, not aggressively, just a small shift of her fingers toward Carter's wrist. The movement was so subtle that most people in the room missed it entirely, but Carter felt it. The precise pressure she applied to a specific point on his wrist sent a shock of numbness through his entire arm, causing his grip to loosen involuntarily. She didn't push him away. She didn't strike back. She simply stepped to the side as his numbed fingers released her throat, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Before Carter could process what had happened, she was back at the patient's side, checking his vitals as if nothing had occurred. "Pressure's stabilizing," she announced calmly. "The factor 7 is working. We have a window to complete the repair before Dr. Morrison arrives." Carter stood there for a moment, flexing his still tingling fingers, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and something that might have been fear. The entire room held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "This isn't over," he growled, his voice lower now, more dangerous. "You just ended your career, Delilah. I'll make sure you never work in medicine again." He turned and stormed out, the doors swinging violently in his wake. As soon as he was gone, the room erupted in whispers. "How did you do that?" David asked, staring at Iris with a mixture of awe and confusion. His whole arm just went dead. Iris didn't answer. She was already focused back on the patient, her hands moving with practiced precision as she prepared for the next phase of the surgery. But Amber, still recording from her corner, zoomed in on something the others had missed. The way Iris's fingers had found that pressure point without looking. The way her body had positioned itself for maximum leverage despite appearing completely passive. These weren't the movements of a normal surgical nurse. These were the movements of someone trained in something far more dangerous than medicine. The next 15 minutes passed in tense efficiency. Dr. Morrison finally arrived, apologizing profusely for the delay, and immediately took over the surgery. He was a good surgeon, competent and careful, but even he seemed to defer to Iris's suggestions about the patient's condition. There was something about the way she assessed the surgical field, the way she anticipated his needs before he voiced them, that spoke of experience beyond her years. As they worked to repair the damage from the shrapnel, Iris found herself thinking about how she'd ended up here, in this operating room, pretending to be just another nurse. 5 years of maintaining this cover, 5 years of suppressing every instinct, every piece of training that had been drilled into her during 7 years with Marine Force Reconnaissance, and another 3 years training Navy SEALs in combat medicine. She'd treated wounds like this before, but under very different circumstances. In mud-filled ditches in Afghanistan, in the back of bouncing helicopters over Iraq, in places where the difference between life and death was measured in seconds, not minutes. "Excellent work with the factor 7, Dr. Morrison murmured as he sutured an arterial tear. "You probably saved his life with that call." "Just following my training, doctor," Iris replied softly, though they both knew there was nothing routine about the decision she'd made. Factor 7 was a powerful clotting agent, typically reserved for the most severe hemorrhages. Using it required precise timing and dosage. Too little, and it wouldn't stop the bleeding. Too much, and it could cause fatal clots. The fact that she'd calculated the exact amount needed without hesitation had not gone unnoticed. As the surgery concluded successfully, Iris began the methodical process of counting instruments and checking supplies. It was mundane work, the kind that most people would find tedious, but she'd learned long ago that routine was a good cover. People didn't look too closely at someone doing boring, repetitive tasks. They didn't wonder about the person folding surgical drapes with military precision, or notice that she always positioned herself with clear sight lines to every exit. If you're watching from a military base or have family who served, drop your location in the comments below. This story of a hidden warrior in scrubs will remind you why we never judge a book by its cover. Hit that subscribe button and the bell icon, because what happens next will show you the true meaning of strength under pressure. Dr. Hazel Priscilla approached as Iris was disposing of the biohazard materials. Hazel was one of the few surgeons who treated the nursing staff with genuine respect, and she'd witnessed the entire confrontation with Carter. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly, her eyes flicking to the red marks on Iris's throat that were already beginning to bruise. "I'm fine, Dr. Priscilla," Iris replied, not looking up from her task. "Nothing that won't heal." Hazel studied her for a moment, taking in the calm demeanor, the steady hands, the complete lack of emotional response to what had just been a violent assault. "You should file a report. What Carter did was assault, with witnesses." "Reports have a way of getting lost in this hospital," Iris said simply, a truth they both knew all too well. Mason Carter hadn't gotten to his position by playing fair. He had connections throughout the hospital board, political allies who valued his fundraising abilities more than his medical knowledge or leadership skills. "Still," Hazel persisted, "you shouldn't have to tolerate that. None of us should." Iris finally looked up, and for just a moment, Hazel saw something flicker in those blue eyes, something hard and dangerous that disappeared so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it. "I've tolerated worse, doctor. Much worse." Before Hazel could respond, the doors burst open again, and Ashley, the hospital's human resources director, marched in with her tablet clutched to her chest like a weapon. Ashley was Carter's enforcer, a woman who seemed to take personal pleasure in making the nursing staff's lives miserable. She was the one who denied overtime pay on technicalities, who scheduled mandatory training sessions during people's days off, who always seemed to be lurking around corners, looking for violations to report. "Iris Delilah," Ashley announced with a kind of satisfaction usually reserved for serving arrest warrants, "Dr. Carter has filed a formal complaint about your insubordination and practicing medicine without a license. You're to report to the administrative office immediately." The room went quiet again. Everyone knew what this meant. When Carter wanted someone gone, Ashley made it happen. She had orchestrated the dismissal of dozens of employees over the past 2 years, always finding just enough technical violations to make termination legally defensible. "I need to finish post-operative documentation," Iris said calmly, continuing to type notes into the computer system. Ashley's face flushed red, her carefully styled blonde hair seeming to bristle with indignation. "This is not a request. You will come with me now, or I'll have security escort you out." Iris saved her documentation, logged out of the system with deliberate slowness, and removed her surgical cap. As she did, several people noticed something odd about the way she moved. Economical, efficient, no wasted motion. It was the movement pattern of someone who had learned to conserve energy for when it was truly needed. "Lead the way," Iris said simply. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Iris noticed things that others might miss. The security cameras at every intersection, the exits marked and unmarked, the rhythm of foot traffic at this time of day. Old habits died hard, and some habits never died at all. She'd been trained to constantly assess her environment, to always know her position relative to safety and danger. Even after 5 years of playing civilian, those instincts remained sharp. They passed the main nursing station where several of Iris's colleagues were gathered. Word had already spread about the confrontation in the OR, and sympathetic looks followed her progress. Nurse Julia, a mother of 3 who'd been at Walter Reed for 15 years, shook her head sadly. She'd seen this play out before. Carter and Ashley were like a tag team of workplace toxicity, and once they set their sights on someone, that person's days were numbered. Modern surgical monitoring systems have revolutionized emergency medicine. These advanced devices track vital signs in real time, alerting medical staff to the slightest changes in patient condition. With integrated AI analysis, they can predict complications before they occur, giving doctors and nurses crucial extra seconds to respond. In military hospitals, this technology has increased survival rates by 40%. The administrative office was exactly what one would expect from a bureaucratic power center: imposing furniture, walls lined with diplomas and certificates, and an atmosphere designed to intimidate. Carter sat behind his massive oak desk, his tie loosened, and his face still flushed from the morning's confrontation. To his right sat Dr. Ethan, the department head who seemed to view nurses as somewhat intelligent furniture. To his left, 2 members of the hospital board, people whose names Iris knew, but who had never bothered to learn hers. "Sit," Carter commanded, pointing to a single chair positioned in the center of the room, spotlit by overhead lighting in a way that was clearly intentional. Iris sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap, her expression neutral. She'd been in far more intimidating situations than this. Had sat across from Taliban commanders, had been interrogated by enemy forces who had much more creative ways of applying pressure than harsh lighting and uncomfortable seating. "Do you know why you're here?" Carter began, his tone suggesting he was enjoying this. "You filed a complaint," Iris replied simply. "I filed a complaint because you deliberately violated hospital protocol, administered medication without authorization, and then physically assaulted me when I tried to correct your behavior." The lie was so brazen that even Ashley looked slightly uncomfortable. Dr. Ethan shifted in his seat, clearly aware that multiple people had witnessed what actually happened. But they also knew that Carter's version would become the official record, unless someone was brave enough to contradict him. "Is that your recollection of events?" Iris asked, her tone genuinely curious rather than challenging. Carter leaned forward, his bulk making the expensive leather chair creak. "Are you questioning my account?" "I'm simply asking if that's what you remember," Iris said calmly. Memory can be subjective, especially in high-stress situations. My memory is perfectly clear, Carter snapped. You overstepped your boundaries, endangered a patient, and then attacked me when I intervened. These are grounds for immediate termination and referral to the licensing board. Ashley pulled up something on her tablet, her manicured nails clicking against the screen. According to your personnel file, Ms. Delilah, you've been a surgical nurse here for 5 years. Your performance reviews have been adequate, nothing exceptional, nothing that would suggest you have the expertise to make the kind of medical decisions you made today. It was another lie. Iris's performance reviews had been stellar, filled with commendations from surgeons and fellow nurses alike. But those reviews had a way of being edited after the fact, when Ashley got involved. Paper trails could be altered, digital records could be modified, and who would believe a nurse's word against the CEO's? Furthermore, Ashley continued, clearly enjoying herself, your educational background seems limited. An associate degree in nursing from a community college, some additional certifications, but nothing that would qualify you to override a doctor's authority. Iris remained silent. Her real educational background, combat medicine training at Camp Pendleton, advanced trauma management at the Navy Medical Center, specialized instruction in battlefield surgery that most doctors would never receive. None of that appeared in her civilian records. It couldn't. The moment anyone looked too closely at Gunnery Sergeant Iris Delilah's military record, her carefully constructed cover would dissolve. Dr. Ethan finally spoke, his voice carrying the kind of casual condescension that suggested he viewed this meeting as an annoying interruption to his golf schedule. The real question, Ms. Delilah, is whether you understand the hierarchy of this institution. Nurses support doctors. They don't make independent decisions. They certainly don't administer controlled substances without explicit authorization. The patient was dying, Iris said quietly. His blood pressure was dropping, and we were losing him. The factor 7 could have killed him if administered incorrectly, Carter interrupted. Which is why that decision requires a doctor's authorization. Your lucky guess doesn't validate your actions. Lucky guess. Iris had calculated the dosage based on the patient's weight, blood loss rate, and coagulation factors, factoring in his medical history and current medications, all in less than 30 seconds. She'd done similar calculations under fire, with bullets whizzing overhead and mortars falling around her position. But to these people, she was just a nurse who got lucky. I understand, Iris said simply. Carter looked triumphant, misinterpreting her calm acceptance as submission. Good. Then you'll understand why we have no choice but to terminate your employment effective immediately. Ashley will escort you to clean out your locker. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you, minus any damages for the equipment you knocked over during your assault on me. The door opened suddenly, and Colonel Blake Anderson walked in, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere of the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of bearing that came from 30 years of military service. His uniform was immaculate, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his eyes, those eyes had seen things that Carter and his cronies couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. Forgive the interruption, the colonel said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. I wanted to thank the surgical team that saved Captain Rodriguez's life. I was told the nurse who made the critical decision would be here. Carter's expression shifted, suddenly aware that he was in the presence of someone with actual authority, not the political kind he wielded, but the kind earned through service and sacrifice. Colonel Anderson, I'm Dr. Mason Carter, the CEO. I was just explaining to Ms. Delilah that while we appreciate her enthusiasm, there are protocols that must be followed. The colonel's gaze shifted to Iris, and something flickered in his expression. Not quite recognition, but something close. He studied her posture, the way she sat, the complete lack of fear or anxiety despite being surrounded by hostile authority figures. These were tells that most people wouldn't notice, but Anderson had spent decades learning to read people, to identify warriors even when they were dressed as civilians. Protocols, the colonel repeated slowly. Tell me, Dr. Carter, how many combat injuries have you treated? Carter bristled at the question. I've been in hospital administration for 15 years. I've overseen thousands of... That's not what I asked, Anderson interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made Carter's bluster seem childish by comparison. I asked how many combat injuries you've personally treated. How many soldiers have you held together with your bare hands while waiting for medevac? How many times have you had to make split-second decisions, knowing that hesitation meant death? The room fell silent. Carter's face was turning an interesting shade of purple, but he didn't dare speak. Even Ashley seemed to shrink into herself, her tablet held protectively against her chest. Anderson turned back to Iris. "The captain is asking for you. He wants to thank the person who saved his life." "I was just doing my job, sir," Iris replied, her voice steady. Anderson studied her for another long moment, and Iris could see the wheels turning in his head. There was something about her that didn't quite fit the picture of a simple surgical nurse. The way she met his gaze without flinching, the way she'd said "sir" with just a hint of military formality, the way she held herself even while seated. These were not the habits of a civilian. "Nevertheless," Anderson said finally, "he insists. And Captain Rodriguez is not a man accustomed to being denied." He turned to Carter. "I trust Ms. Delilah will be free to visit him?" It wasn't really a question. Carter nodded stiffly, trapped between his desire to fire Iris and his fear of antagonizing a colonel who clearly had taken an interest in the situation. "Of course," Carter managed through gritted teeth, "though this doesn't change the disciplinary actions we're discussing." Anderson's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted slightly, a subtle adjustment that Iris recognized as preparation for conflict. Disciplinary action for saving a Marine's life. How interesting. I'm sure the press would find that story fascinating. Military hospital CEO punishes nurse for saving Marine captain. Has a certain ring to it, doesn't it? The implied threat hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Carter's hospital relied heavily on military contracts and federal funding. One scandal, one negative story about their treatment of military personnel, and those contracts could evaporate. Still here? Good. The tension is building, and Iris is about to show why Marines never truly leave the Corps. Share this story with someone who understands that real warriors don't need to advertise. Subscribe now for more incredible military stories. "Perhaps," Dr. Ethan said carefully, "we should postpone this discussion until emotions have cooled. Ms. Delilah can return to her duties for now, and we can revisit the situation later." Carter looked like he wanted to argue, but Anderson's presence made that impossible. "Fine," he spat, "but this isn't over, Delilah. Not by a long shot." Iris stood smoothly, no triumph in her expression, no relief, just the same calm professionalism she'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. As she moved toward the door, Anderson fell into step beside her. "Interesting pressure point technique," he said quietly once they were in the hallway. "Not many nurses know that particular nerve cluster." Iris didn't respond, but Anderson noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the almost imperceptible quickening of her pace. "Combat medic?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Surgical nurse," Iris replied evenly. 5 years at Walter Reed." Anderson made a non-committal sound, but his eyes remained sharp, studying her. They walked in silence to the recovery ward where Captain Rodriguez was being monitored. The captain was awake, groggy but alert, his chest wrapped in bandages but his color good. "There she is," Rodriguez said, his voice rough but warm. "The angel who kept me on this side of the grass." Iris moved to his bedside, automatically checking his vitals, noting his pupil's response, the steadiness of his breathing. These were the actions of a nurse, but Anderson noticed something else. The way she positioned herself to see both the door and the window, the way her assessment included potential threats as well as medical concerns. "How are you feeling, Captain?" Iris asked. "Like I got blown up and put back together," Rodriguez replied with a weak laugh. "Doc Morrison says you're the reason I'm still here. Said you made a call that most doctors wouldn't have had the balls to make." "Dr. Morrison exaggerates," Iris said simply, adjusting his IV drip with practiced efficiency. Rodriguez studied her face, and something in his expression shifted. He'd seen enough combat to recognize a fellow warrior, even when they were trying to hide it. "Have we met before? There's something familiar about you." "I have one of those faces," Iris replied, but she stepped back slightly, creating distance. Anderson noticed the interaction, filed it away. His instincts, honed by 3 decades of military service, were screaming that there was more to Iris Delilah than met the eye. The way she moved, the way she assessed threats, the way she'd handled Carter's assault without escalating. These weren't the actions of a civilian nurse. These were the actions of someone with specialized training, someone who had learned to hide their capabilities behind a mask of normalcy. As they left Rodriguez's room, Anderson made a decision. Ms. Delilah, he said formally, I'd like to speak with you privately. There's a matter I think you might be able to help me with. Iris tensed slightly. I should return to my shift, Colonel. We're short-staffed today. This won't take long, Anderson insisted, guiding her toward a small conference room typically used for family consultations. Once inside, he closed the door and turned to face her directly. I'm going to ask you something, and I need an honest answer, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. Who are you, really? Iris met his gaze steadily. I'm a surgical nurse at Walter Reed Medical Center. No, Anderson said firmly. Surgical nurses don't know combat pressure points. They don't assess rooms for tactical threats. They don't maintain situational awareness like they're still in a war zone. He pulled out his phone, showing her a photograph. This was taken at Camp Lejeune 8 years ago. Force Recon training graduation. Iris glanced at the photo but showed no reaction to the image of Marines in dress blues, one of them bearing a striking resemblance to her, though with shorter hair and harder eyes. That's not me, she said simply. Anderson studied her for a long moment, then pulled up another image. This one was from Afghanistan, a combat medical unit treating wounded soldiers under fire. The image was grainy, taken in harsh conditions, but one of the medics working on a wounded Marine looked remarkably like Iris. That's not me either, Iris repeated, though her voice had taken on a different quality, flatter, more controlled. No, of course not, Anderson agreed, putting his phone away, because Gunnery Sergeant Iris Delilah died in Afghanistan 5 years ago. At least, that's what the classified records say. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Anderson stepped back toward the door. Captain Rodriguez is lucky to have such a skilled nurse caring for him. Someone with the kind of experience that can only be gained in very specific circumstances. Someone who knows that sometimes staying hidden is the best way to continue serving. He opened the door, then paused. Oh, and Ms. Delilah, Master Chief Connor Ryan is visiting his nephew tomorrow. Perhaps you should avoid the Eastern Wing around 1400 hours. I'm sure you wouldn't want to run into any old acquaintances. After Anderson left, Iris stood alone in the conference room, her carefully constructed world beginning to crack at the edges. 5 years she'd maintained this cover. 5 years of being just another nurse. And now it was all threatening to unravel because she'd saved a Marine's life and caught the attention of the wrong people. She made her way back to the surgical unit, where the afternoon shift was beginning. Word of her confrontation with Carter had spread throughout the hospital, and she could feel eyes on her as she walked through the corridors. Some were sympathetic, others curious, and a few were calculating, employees who sensed weakness and were already positioning themselves to avoid the fallout when Carter inevitably destroyed her career. Veterans and active military deserve comprehensive health coverage that understands their unique needs. Specialized military insurance plans now cover everything from combat-related injuries to long-term rehabilitation. These policies include mental health support, family coverage, and even career transition assistance. With no waiting periods for pre-existing conditions, they ensure those who served are never left behind. Dr. Hazel Priscilla found her in the supply room, methodically checking inventory with the same precision she brought to everything. The whole hospital's talking about what happened, Hazel said quietly. Amber's video is making the rounds. Iris looked up sharply. What video? She recorded Carter assaulting you, the whole thing. Him grabbing you, choking you, threatening you, it's all there. Hazel pulled out her phone, showing Iris the footage. It was damning, clearly showing Carter as the aggressor, but Iris knew it wouldn't matter. People like Carter didn't face consequences from videos. They had lawyers, connections, ways of making problems disappear. She should delete it, Iris said, before Carter finds out. Are you serious? Hazel asked, incredulous. This is evidence. This could protect you. Iris went back to her inventory. Nothing protects people like us from people like him. The best we can do is survive, do our jobs, and hope they find bigger targets. But even as she said it, Iris knew her time of hiding was coming to an end. Anderson's questions, Rodriguez's half-recognition, and now, Connor Ryan coming tomorrow. The carefully constructed walls between Gunnery Sergeant Delilah and Nurse Iris were beginning to crumble. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of routine tasks, but Iris couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she turned a corner, she half expected to see someone from her past. someone who would recognize the Marine hiding beneath the nurse's scrubs. The weight of her secret, carried for 5 years, was becoming heavier with each passing hour. As her shift neared its end, she found herself in the break room with several other nurses. The conversation, inevitably, turned to the morning's events. "I can't believe Carter actually put his hands on you," Nurse Willow said, her young face flushed with indignation. "That's assault. You could press charges." "With what proof?" Nurse Grace, the unit supervisor, asked wearily. She'd been at Walter Reed for 20 years and had seen every type of administrative abuse imaginable. It's her word against his, and we all know whose word counts in this hospital. "But there were witnesses," Willow protested. Grace gave her a sad smile. "Witnesses who need their jobs. Witnesses who have families to feed. Witnesses who know that Carter can make their lives hell with a single phone call." Iris listened to the conversation without participating, her mind elsewhere. She was thinking about Afghanistan, about the mission that had supposedly claimed her life, about the choices that had led her to this moment. The official story was that she'd been killed in an ambush, her body never recovered. The truth was far more complicated. She'd been training a group of Navy SEALs in combat medicine when their position was overrun. The fight had been brutal, desperate, the kind of close-quarters combat that left no room for error. She'd saved 4 SEALs that day, but the cost had been high. The things she'd had to do, the lines she'd had to cross, the military had decided it was better if Gunnery Sergeant Delilah simply disappeared. They'd offered her a choice: a quiet medical discharge and a new identity, or a court-martial for actions that, while necessary, violated several international laws regarding combat medicine. It hadn't really been a choice at all. So she'd become Iris Delilah, surgical nurse, nobody special, just another face in the crowd. She'd thought she could leave the warrior behind, thought she could find peace in saving lives without the violence that had defined her military career. For 5 years, it had almost worked. A commotion in the hallway drew everyone's attention. Through the thick break room window, they could see Carter storming past with Ashley and Dr. Ethan in tow, all 3 looking like they were on a warpath. "Looks like round 2, Grace muttered, but they passed by without stopping, heading toward the administrative wing. Iris felt a momentary relief, then realized it might be worse if they were planning something rather than confronting her directly. The moment of truth is approaching. Before the explosive reveal, make sure you're subscribed. Comment below if you've ever witnessed someone being underestimated only to prove everyone wrong. The notification bell ensures you won't miss what comes next." Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Eastern Storage Room, 5 minutes. Come alone." Iris stared at the message, her instincts screaming danger. But something about the formal tone, the military precision of the instructions, made her curious. She excused herself from the break room and made her way to the eastern wing of the hospital, the older section that was mostly used for storage and administrative overflow. The storage room was dimly lit, filled with old medical equipment and unused furniture. As she entered, a figure stepped out from behind a shelf, and Iris's hand instinctively moved toward where her sidearm would have been, if she still carried one. It was Master Chief Connor Ryan. They stood there for a long moment, 2 warriors recognizing each other across the gulf of years and assumed identities. Connor looked older, gray streaking his temples, but his eyes were still sharp, still carrying the intensity that had made him one of the Navy's most decorated SEALs. "Gunny," he said finally, using her old rank, the single word carrying years of history. "I'm just a nurse now," Iris replied, though her posture had shifted unconsciously to parade rest. Connor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right. A nurse who can calculate combat drug dosages in her head and disable a man twice her size without breaking a sweat." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I was there, Gunny, in Kandahar, when you pulled Williams and Martinez out of that kill zone, when you operated on Thompson for 3 hours with nothing but a combat knife and dental floss. You don't just stop being that person. That person is dead," Iris said firmly. "The military made that very clear." "The military made a mistake," Connor countered. "They threw away one of the best combat medics I've ever seen because some politician didn't like the optics of what you had to do to save lives." The memory hit her like a physical blow. The senator's son, part of a SEAL team that had walked into an ambush. The boy had been hit bad, femoral artery severed, bleeding out fast. The only way to save him had been an emergency field surgery that involved techniques not approved by the Geneva Convention, techniques that looked barbaric to people who'd never seen what warfare really meant. She'd saved him, but the video footage taken by a journalist embedded with the unit had been devastating. Without context, without understanding the desperate nature of the situation, it looked like she was torturing a wounded soldier. The fact that the soldier lived, that he walked out of Walter Reed 6 months later on his own 2 feet, hadn't mattered to the people making decisions in air-conditioned offices thousands of miles from the battlefield. "Why are you here?" Iris asked, pushing the memories aside. Connor reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. It was recent, taken at what looked like a military ceremony. In it, several high-ranking officers stood with a group of Navy SEALs, and in the background, partially hidden but still visible, was Mason Carter, shaking hands with someone Iris recognized. General Patricia Blackstone, head of military procurement for the entire East Coast. "Your CEO isn't just an asshole," Connor said. "He's a corrupt asshole. He's been skimming from military contracts, selling substandard medical supplies to field hospitals, and covering it up with his connections. 3 soldiers died last month in Syria because their blood supply was contaminated, blood that came from this hospital." Iris studied the photograph, her mind already working through the implications. "And you want me to do what exactly?" "Nothing," Connor said, surprising her. "I want you to do absolutely nothing except be yourself. Because tomorrow, when Carter has his big board meeting with General Blackstone, some interesting information is going to come to light, and when it does, he's going to look for someone to blame, someone like a nurse who challenged his authority and made him look bad in front of his staff." "You're using me as bait," Iris said. "Not a question, but a statement." "I'm giving you an opportunity," Connor corrected, "to be the warrior you've always been, just in a different battlefield. Carter's going to come after you hard tomorrow, and when he does, when he pushes you to the breaking point in front of witnesses—" He smiled, and it was the smile of a predator. "Well, let's just say that sometimes the best way to take down an enemy is to let them destroy themselves." Iris handed the photograph back. "I'm done with that life." "No, you're not," Connor said with certainty. "You're hiding from it. There's a difference." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Oh, and Gunny? That pressure point move you used on Carter? The Hokkaido nerve cluster? I taught that to my team last month. Called it the Delilah maneuver. They were very impressed." After he left, Iris stood alone in the storage room, surrounded by the detritus of medical history, feeling the weight of her past crashing into her present. Tomorrow, everything would change. She could feel it in her bones, the same way she'd felt incoming fire in Afghanistan, the same way she'd known which wounded soldiers would make it and which wouldn't. She made her way back to finish her shift, but her mind was elsewhere. In the surgical unit, she found Amber waiting for her, the young nurse's face pale and frightened. "Ms. Delilah," Amber whispered urgently, "Carter knows about the video. Ashley told him. He's going to the board tonight to demand my termination for violating patient privacy by recording in the OR." Iris felt a cold anger settle in her chest. It was one thing for Carter to come after her. She could handle herself. But Amber was just a kid, barely out of nursing school, trying to do the right thing in a system designed to protect the wrong people. "Give me your phone," Iris said. Amber handed it over, confused. Iris quickly forwarded the video to an encrypted email address she hadn't used in 5 years, one that connected to people who knew how to make sure things didn't disappear. "There," she said, handing the phone back. "The video's safe. If they try to fire you, if they threaten you, you tell them copies have been sent to the Inspector General's office, the Joint Commission, and 3 major news outlets." "But that's not true, is it?" Iris gave her a small smile. "It is now." As the evening shift began, Iris could feel the hospital's atmosphere changing. Word of tomorrow's board meeting had spread, and everyone knew something big was coming. Carter had called an all-hands meeting for 0900 hours, mandatory attendance for all department heads and senior staff. Online combat medicine certification programs are training the next generation of battlefield medics. These intensive courses combine virtual reality simulations with real-world scenarios, teaching everything from tactical field care to mass casualty triage. Developed by former special operations medics, they are now available to civilian medical professionals seeking advanced trauma skills. The night passed slowly. Iris found herself walking the halls of the hospital, observing the controlled chaos that never really stopped in a military medical facility. Wounded soldiers arriving from overseas, training accidents from nearby bases. the everyday medical needs of military families. It all blended into a rhythm she'd grown accustomed to over the past 5 years. In the ICU, she stopped to check on Captain Rodriguez. He was sleeping, his vitals stable, the surgery having been completely successful. Looking at him, she remembered all the other Marines she'd treated, all the ones she'd saved and the ones she couldn't. Each face was etched in her memory, a catalog of best efforts and last chances. "Can't sleep either," Dr. Hazel's voice came from behind her. Iris turned to find the surgeon looking exhausted, still in scrubs from an emergency surgery. "Just checking on the captain," Iris replied. Hazel stood beside her, both of them watching Rodriguez's steady breathing. "You know, I've been at this hospital for 10 years, Hazel said quietly. "I've seen Carter destroy dozens of careers, always picking on people who can't fight back. Nurses, technicians, support staff. But something about you is different. You don't seem afraid of him." "Fear is a choice," Iris said simply. "Is it? When someone has the power to destroy your livelihood, your reputation, your future?" Iris turned to look at Hazel directly. "I've faced people who wanted to destroy a lot more than my livelihood. Carter's just a bully with a fancy title, and bullies always make the same mistake." "What's that?" "They assume their victims are weak just because they don't fight back immediately. They never consider that maybe, just maybe, their victim is choosing not to fight, that there's a difference between can't and won't." Hazel studied her for a long moment. "You're not really just a nurse, are you?" Before Iris could respond, her pager went off. Emergency surgery, or 7. She looked at Hazel apologetically and headed for the surgical unit, grateful for the interruption. Justice is being served, but there's still more to uncover. 2 more incredible stories are waiting on your screen right now. Click to discover another hidden hero, and remember to subscribe for daily stories of quiet professionals who changed everything. The emergency surgery was routine. A training accident from Fort Belvoir, a young private who had fallen during an obstacle course. As Iris prepped the OR, she found herself working alongside David, the surgical tech from the morning's incident. "Ms. Delilah," he said quietly as they arranged instruments, "what you did this morning with Carter, that was incredible. I've never seen anyone stand up to him like that." "I didn't stand up to him," Iris corrected. "I just didn't fall down." David laughed nervously. "Still, the way you handled it. My girlfriend's in the Army, stationed at Fort Meade. She says the best soldiers are the ones who know when to fight and when to wait. You seem like someone who knows the difference." The surgery proceeded smoothly, and as dawn approached, Iris realized she'd been at the hospital for nearly 24 hours. But she couldn't leave, not with the board meeting looming. She showered in the staff facilities and changed into fresh scrubs, then made herself another cup of the bitter coffee that seemed to be the hospital's primary fuel source. At 0800 hours, people began gathering for Carter's meeting. The main conference room had been chosen for its size and its intimidation factor, a massive space with Carter's seat elevated on a small platform, allowing him to literally look down on everyone else. Iris entered the room to find it already packed. Every department head was there, along with senior nurses, administrators, and several people she didn't recognize, likely board members or external consultants. Carter sat at his elevated position, Ashley to his right, Dr. Ethan to his left, all 3 looking like they were preparing for an execution. She found a seat near the back, trying to remain inconspicuous, but she could feel eyes on her. Word had spread that she was Carter's target, and everyone was watching to see how this would play out. At exactly 0900 hours, Carter stood, his bulk making him look even more imposing from his elevated position. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the false warmth of a politician about to destroy an opponent, "we're here to discuss a serious breach of protocol that occurred yesterday, one that endangered a patient's life and revealed fundamental problems with how some members of our staff view their roles in this institution." The conference room fell silent as Carter's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. He clicked a remote, and a presentation appeared on the screen behind him. Iris's personnel file, her photo enlarged to show every detail of her unremarkable appearance. "Nurse Iris Delilah," Carter continued, his voice dripping with disdain, "took it upon herself yesterday to administer Factor 7, a controlled substance with potentially fatal complications, without authorization from a qualified physician. This wasn't courage or quick thinking. It was reckless endangerment disguised as heroism." Iris remained perfectly still in her seat, her breathing steady, her expression neutral. Around her, she could feel the tension building as colleagues shifted uncomfortably, torn between their loyalty to her and their fear of Carter's retribution. Ashley stood, her tablet in hand, ready to deliver what was clearly a rehearsed character assassination. According to our investigation, Ms. Delilah has a pattern of overstepping her boundaries. She's been observed questioning doctors' orders, spending unauthorized time reviewing patient files, and maintaining an unusual interest in trauma cases that fall outside her assigned duties. The accusations were technically true, but completely misrepresented. Yes, Iris had questioned orders, when they were wrong and would have harmed patients. Yes, she'd reviewed files, to better understand conditions she might encounter. Yes, she showed interest in trauma cases, because that was where her true expertise lay, even if she couldn't reveal it. Furthermore, Dr. Ethan added, standing to join the attack, several staff members have reported feeling uncomfortable around Ms. Delilah. There's something about her demeanor that suggests she considers herself above her station, as if her nursing degree somehow makes her equal to those of us with actual medical doctorates. It was a masterful manipulation of the truth. The staff members who felt uncomfortable were people like Ashley and Ethan, who sensed that Iris saw through their incompetence. The doctors who actually worked with her, who saw her skill and dedication daily, were notably absent from this meeting, either not invited or warned to stay away. Carter resumed control of the presentation, clicking to a new slide that showed security camera footage from various locations in the hospital. We've conducted a thorough review of Ms. Delilah's activities over the past month. What we found was disturbing. The footage showed Iris walking through the hospital, but it had been edited to create a narrative. Her routine security checks became suspicious surveillance. Her efficient movement patterns became sneaking around restricted areas. Her habit of noting exit routes became casing the building for unknown purposes. "This is ridiculous," a voice said from the middle of the room. Dr. Hazel Priscilla stood, her face flushed with anger. "You're presenting completely normal behavior as something sinister. Every nurse in this hospital walks those same routes, checks those same areas." Carter's expression darkened. "Dr. Priscilla, you're out of order. This is an administrative review, not a debate." "No, this is a witch hunt," Hazel shot back. "You're targeting Iris because she made you look bad, because she saved a life when you would have let that Marine die waiting for protocol." The room erupted in whispers. Several other staff members nodded in agreement, though few were brave enough to voice it. Carter's face was turning purple, his carefully orchestrated meeting beginning to slip from his control. "Enough!" he bellowed. "Dr. Priscilla, you're suspended pending review of your own conduct. Anyone else who wants to join her is welcome to speak up now." The threat silenced most of the room, but Colonel Blake Anderson, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood slowly. His presence immediately commanded attention, his uniform a stark reminder that this was a military facility, not Carter's private kingdom. "Dr. Carter," Anderson said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority, "I'm curious about something. You keep talking about protocol and proper channels. Tell me, what's the protocol when a patient is dying and the authorized physician is unavailable? Do we let them die for the sake of paperwork?" Carter straightened, trying to match Anderson's commanding presence but failing miserably. "There are established procedures that assume perfect conditions," Anderson interrupted, "but medicine, especially military medicine, rarely provides perfect conditions. Sometimes decisive action saves lives. Sometimes hesitation kills. Ms. Delilah understood that distinction. Do you?" Before Carter could respond, the conference room doors burst open. Master Chief Connor Ryan entered, flanked by 2 other Navy SEALs in full-dress uniforms. Their presence changed the entire dynamic of the room, their bearing and decorations making it clear these were not men to be trifled with. "Apologies for the interruption," Connor said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "We're here regarding the accusations against Ms. Delilah." Carter's confusion was evident. "This is a private administrative meeting. You have no authority." "Actually, we do," Connor interrupted, producing a document from his jacket. "This is a federal investigation warrant. We've been investigating irregularities in medical supply procurement at this facility, and Ms. Delilah is a key witness." Ashley's tablet slipped from her hands, clattering on the floor. "Dr." Ethan's face went pale, but Carter, still not understanding the danger he was in, pushed forward with his attack. "Witness or not, she assaulted me yesterday. I have witnesses." You mean when you physically attacked her in an operating room? Connor asked mildly. When you grabbed her throat and slammed her against a wall? Yes, we've seen the video. Very compelling evidence of assault by a hospital administrator against a medical professional performing her duties. Carter's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The board members, who had been silent until now, began exchanging worried glances. This was spiraling far beyond a simple disciplinary hearing. General Patricia Blackstone entered the room next, her presence making even Anderson straighten to attention. She was a small woman, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who had commanded respect in rooms full of people who underestimated her. "Dr. Carter," she said, her voice cutting through the case like a blade, "we need to discuss your procurement contracts. Specifically, the blood supplies that were shipped to Forward Operating Base Hammer last month. The ones that resulted in 3 preventable deaths." The accusation landed like a bomb. Everyone in the room knew about the incident. 3 soldiers had died from contaminated blood products during routine surgeries. The official investigation had blamed it on storage problems in the field, but if the contamination had originated here— "I don't know what you're talking about," Carter stammered, but sweat was now pouring down his face. General Blackstone pulled out her own tablet, scrolling through data. "We have documentation showing that you personally approved the shipment of blood products that had been flagged for quality concerns. You overrode 3 different safety protocols to push that shipment through. Why?" "This is preposterous," Carter shouted, his composure finally cracking completely. "This is all her doing." He pointed at Iris, who still hadn't moved from her seat. "She's been undermining me since she got here, questioning my decisions, making me look incompetent. She probably planted that evidence." His rant was cut short as he suddenly lunged toward Iris, crossing the room faster than anyone expected from a man of his size. "You did this. You destroyed everything I've built." What happened next would be replayed on cell phone videos and discussed in military circles for years to come. As Carter reached for her, Iris moved, not the hesitant, defensive movement of a frightened nurse, but the explosive, decisive action of a trained warrior. She sidestepped his charge, using his momentum against him, and in one fluid motion that spoke of years of muscle memory, she had him face down on the conference table, his arm locked behind his back in a hold that completely immobilized him, despite their size difference. The room erupted. People jumped back, phones came out, recording everything. But what happened next was even more shocking. In the struggle, Iris's scrub top had been pulled, tearing along the shoulder seam. As the fabric fell away, it revealed something that made Master Chief Connor Ryan immediately snap to attention: a tattoo on her right shoulder blade. Not just any tattoo, but the distinctive eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps, surrounded by additional markings that only a few people in the room would recognize. The Force Reconnaissance insignia, and below it, in small but clear text, SEAL Times 6 Instructor, Camp Coronado. The silence that followed was deafening. Connor Ryan's hand came up in a crisp salute, his voice carrying across the stunned room. "Gunnery Sergeant Delilah, it's an honor, ma'am." The 2 other SEALs with him immediately followed suit, their salutes sharp and respectful. Colonel Anderson stood slowly, his expression cycling through surprise, recognition, and profound respect. "My God," he breathed, "you're the ghost of Kandahar. You're the one who saved Echo Platoon." Iris released Carter, who scrambled away from her, his face pale with shock and fear. She stood straight, adjusting her torn scrub top with one hand, while maintaining the kind of bearing that came from years of military discipline. "That person is dead," she said quietly, but her voice carried to every corner of the room. "Killed in action 5 years ago, according to official records." "No," Connor said firmly, lowering his salute but maintaining his respectful posture. "Gunnery Sergeant Iris Delilah, Marine Force Reconnaissance, Combat Medic Instructor for SEAL Team 6. 7 years of service with Force Recon, 3 years training the Navy's elite. 14 confirmed saves under fire, including the Kandahar 6. General Blackstone stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "I remember you," she said slowly. "You're the one who performed that field surgery on Senator Morrison's son. The one that saved his life but ended your career." The room was buzzing now, everyone trying to process what they were witnessing. The quiet nurse they'd worked alongside for 5 years was actually a decorated Marine who had trained Navy SEALs? The woman Carter had been bullying and threatening was a warrior who had saved some of America's most elite soldiers. Ashley had collapsed into a chair, her face white as she realized the magnitude of their mistake. Dr. Ethan looked like he might be sick. And Carter? Carter was backing toward the door, his eyes wild with panic. "You can't be here," he stammered. "You're supposed to be dead. The record said what the military needed them to say," Anderson interrupted. "Sometimes, our best assets need to disappear, to continue serving in different ways." Gunnery Sergeant Delilah was given a choice after the political fallout from the Morrison incident. Disappear or face a court-martial for techniques that saved lives but didn't look good on camera. Dr. Hazel stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "You gave up everything to keep serving, to keep saving lives, even after they threw you away." Iris's expression remained controlled, but there was pain in her eyes. "I gave up a uniform. I never gave up the mission. Marines don't know how to quit." The phone in Connor's pocket buzzed. He checked it, and his expression grew grim. "Ma'am, we've just received confirmation. The contaminated blood that killed those 3 soldiers, it was deliberately tampered with. Carter wasn't just cutting corners for profit. He was selling clean blood on the black market and replacing it with cheaper, untested products." The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. This wasn't just negligence or greed. This was murder for profit. Carter tried to run, but 2 military police officers who had been waiting outside entered and blocked his path. "Dr. Mason Carter," one of them announced formally, "you're under arrest for dereliction of duty resulting in death, conspiracy to defraud the United States government, and 3 counts of involuntary manslaughter." As they handcuffed him, Carter's eyes found Iris one last time. "This is your fault," he screamed. "If you had just stayed in your place, if you had just been a normal nurse—" "She was never just a nurse," General Blackstone said coldly. "She was a Marine serving undercover, maintaining her watch even after the military failed her. While you were selling out soldiers for profit, she was saving their lives for a fraction of what you make." As Carter was dragged away, still screaming threats and denials, Ashley tried to slip out quietly. But Anderson's voice stopped her. "Ms. Ashley, you'll need to remain here. The investigators will want to discuss your role in covering up Carter's activities." Ashley's legs gave out, and she collapsed into a chair, sobbing. The mighty had fallen, and they'd taken their enablers with them. The room slowly began to empty as military investigators took over, interviewing witnesses and collecting evidence. But a small group remained gathered around Iris: Connor Ryan, Colonel Anderson, General Blackstone, and Dr. Hazel. "What happens now?" Hazel asked. "Will you return to active duty?" Iris shook her head. "That life is over. I'm just a nurse now." "No," General Blackstone said firmly. "You're never just anything. You're a Marine who found a different way to serve. And speaking of service," she pulled out an official-looking document. "The Pentagon has been developing a new program, combat medicine training for field medics, incorporating the unconventional techniques that have saved lives but aren't in the standard manuals. We need someone to lead it, someone who understands both the medicine and the reality of combat." Iris looked at the document, seeing her real name for the first time in 5 years. "You want me to teach? I want you to do what you've always done," Blackstone replied. "Save lives and train others to do the same, but this time with full support and recognition. No more hiding." Connor Jan stepped forward. "The teams need this, Gunny. We've lost too many people who could have been saved if medics knew what you know. The techniques you developed, the procedures you pioneered, they need to be taught." "What about the political fallout?" Iris asked. "The whole reason I had to disappear—" "Senator Morrison's son is now Congressman Morrison," Anderson interrupted. "He's been fighting for 5 years to clear your name, to get recognition for the person who saved his life. He'll be your biggest supporter." Iris stood there, surrounded by people offering her a chance to reclaim her identity, to serve openly again. It was everything she'd thought she wanted for 5 years. But "I need time to think," she said finally. General Blackstone nodded. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Gunnery Sergeant, your actions yesterday saving Captain Rodriguez, you'll be receiving a civilian commendation for that. It's not the medals you should have received for your military service, but it's a start." As the officials left, Iris found herself alone with Hazel, who was still processing everything she'd learned. "Why nursing?" Hazel asked finally. "With your skills, you could have done anything." Iris looked out the window at the helicopter pad where medical flights arrived daily, bringing wounded soldiers from around the world. Because here, I could still make a difference. Every soldier who came through those doors, I could help save. It wasn't the battlefield, but it was still the mission. And you never told anyone? What would be the point? The people who needed to know, knew. Everyone else? She shrugged. Everyone else just needed me to do my job. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of investigations, interviews, and revelations. Carter's corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Millions of dollars siphoned off, hundreds of soldiers put at risk, and a network of conspirators that reached into multiple military hospitals. Ashley agreed to testify in exchange for immunity, revealing how Carter had systematically targeted anyone who might expose his crimes. Dr. Ethan was found to have been taking bribes to falsify inspection reports. The entire administrative structure of the hospital was dismantled and rebuilt. Through it all, Iris continued working her shifts, treating patients, training younger nurses. But now, there was a difference. The staff looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. Young nurses sought her advice. Doctors deferred to her expertise on trauma cases. Captain Rodriguez, recovering well from his surgery, insisted on personally thanking her once he learned the truth. "You saved my life twice," he said. "Once on that operating table, and once by exposing the corruption that might have killed me with contaminated blood." "Just doing my job, Captain," Iris replied, but there was a small smile on her lips. A week after the confrontation, Iris was called to a meeting in what had been Carter's office. She found General Blackstone there, along with Connor Ryan and a man in a civilian suit who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Ms. Delilah," the man said, standing as she entered, "I'm Congressman Morrison. I owe you my life." Iris recognized him now, older, more mature, but still the same young SEAL she'd saved in that blood-soaked field in Afghanistan. The surgery that had ended her military career had given him the chance to leave the military and enter politics. "Congressman," she acknowledged with a nod. "I've spent 5 years trying to find you," he said, emotion thick in his voice. "When they told me you were dead, I knew it was a lie. The military doesn't lose bodies, not really. They just sometimes need them to disappear." He pulled out a thick folder. "I've had a team of lawyers working on this since I took office. Full exoneration for your actions in Afghanistan, restoration of rank and benefits, back pay for the 5 years you were forced to hide. It's all here, just waiting for your signature." Iris looked at the documents that would restore everything she'd lost: her rank, her honor, her identity. "And in exchange?" "No exchange," Morrison said firmly. "This is justice, not a transaction. You saved my life using methods that horrified people who'd never been in combat." The video looked brutal because combat medicine is brutal, but brutal techniques save lives when conventional ones fail. General Blackstone leaned forward. "The training program I mentioned, it's fully funded, located at Camp Pendleton, with satellite facilities at major military hospitals. You'd have complete autonomy to develop the curriculum, choose your instructors, set your standards. We're calling it the Delilah Protocol," Connor Ryan added. "Every SEAL team, every Force Recon unit, every Special Operations medic would go through your program. You'd be saving lives across the entire Special Operations community." Iris stood at the window, looking out at the city beyond the hospital grounds. For 5 years, she'd lived in the shadows, hidden from the world that had rejected her. Now they were offering her everything back, and more. "There's one condition," she said finally. "Name it," Blackstone replied immediately. "I keep working here, part-time. This hospital, these soldiers, they still need good nurses. And sometimes, the best place to make a difference is where nobody expects it." Morrison smiled. "I think that can be arranged." As they finalized the details, Iris felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Wholeness. Not just the restoration of her identity, but the integration of all her parts. The warrior and the healer, the teacher and the student, the Marine who never stopped serving, just changed her battlefield. That evening, there was an impromptu celebration in the hospital cafeteria. Word had spread about everything: Carter's arrest, the corruption scandal, and most of all, the revelation of who Iris really was. Nurses who had worked beside her for years approached with mixtures of awe and embarrassment. "I complained to you about a difficult shift once," Nurse Julia admitted, "and you just listened and gave me advice. You must have thought I was so ridiculous, complaining about overtime when you had been in actual war zones." "Pain is relative," Iris replied gently. Your struggles were real to you. That's all that matters. Young Nurse Willow approached nervously. Could you teach us? Some of what you know, the combat medicine stuff? Iris looked around at the eager faces of the medical staff. You know what? Why not? Informal sessions, after shifts, basic trauma response techniques that could help in any emergency situation. The enthusiasm was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, she had a list of 30 people who wanted to learn. Dr. Hazel raised a glass of juice and a toast. To Iris Delilah, who showed us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear scrubs and fold them with military precision. The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, the kind that comes after intense shared experience. But Iris noticed someone standing apart from the celebration. Amber, the young nurse who had recorded the original assault. Iris approached her quietly. You did a brave thing recording that video. It took courage. I was terrified, Amber admitted. But I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Though compared to what you've done, courage isn't about the size of the action, Iris interrupted. It's about doing what's right, even when you're scared. You stood up to power when it would have been easier to look away. That's real bravery. Amber's eyes filled with tears. Could I be one of your students? In the informal sessions? I'd be honored, Iris replied. 3 months later, the Delilah Protocol was officially launched at Camp Pendleton. The ceremony was small, deliberately low-key at Iris's request, but the attendees included some of the most decorated special operations personnel in the American military. Gunnery Sergeant Iris Delilah stood in her dress blues for the first time in 5 years, the uniform feeling both foreign and perfectly right. Her chest bore the decorations she'd earned but never been allowed to wear publicly. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Valor device. Ladies and gentlemen, General Blackstone announced, the Delilah Protocol represents a revolution in combat medicine. Techniques that have saved hundreds of lives but existed outside official doctrine will now be taught systematically. Lives that would have been lost will be saved. And it's all because one Marine refused to stop serving, even when the institution she served turned its back on her. Connor Ryan, now wearing Master Chief insignia, would be one of the first instructors in the program. As he stood beside Iris, he said quietly, "You know this is just the beginning, right? Once word gets out about what you're teaching, every allied military will want to send their medics here." "Good," Iris replied. "The more people who know how to save lives, the better." The first class of students was deliberately small, 12 combat medics from various special operations units. As Iris stood before them in the training facility, she saw the same skepticism she'd once faced as a female Marine in a male-dominated field. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority of hard-won experience. "You're here because conventional combat medicine has limits. I'm here to teach you what happens when those limits aren't enough. Some of what you'll learn will seem barbaric. Some of it will challenge everything you've been taught about medical ethics, but all of it works, and all of it saves lives." She pulled out a combat knife and placed it on the table. This is a weapon, but in the right hands, with the right knowledge, it's also a surgical instrument. By the end of this course, you'll know how to use it as both. One of the students, a Navy corpsman with multiple deployments, raised his hand. "Ma'am, is it true you performed a thoracotomy with a K-bar knife?" K-bar knife, dental floss for sutures, and a tampon for wound packing, Iris confirmed. The patient walked out of Walter Reed 6 months later. Sometimes, perfect is the enemy of good enough. The training was intense, combining classroom instruction with hyper-realistic field exercises. Iris taught them techniques that weren't in any manual: how to use superglue for rapid wound closure, how to perform cricothyrotomies with pen tubes, how to use tampons and maxi pads for bullet wound management. But more than techniques, she taught them mindset. In combat medicine, hesitation kills. You'll face situations where every option seems wrong, where any action might cause harm. Your job is to choose the option that gives your patient the best chance, even if it's only a slightly better chance than dying. Meanwhile, she continued her work at Walter Reed, now officially splitting her time between the hospital and Camp Pendleton. The hospital had undergone a complete transformation under new leadership. Colonel Anderson had been promoted to oversee military medical facilities for the entire region, and Dr. Hazel had been appointed as the new chief of surgery. Carter's trial made national news. He was ultimately convicted on all charges and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Ashley received 5 years probation in exchange for her testimony. Dr. Ethan lost his medical license and faced his own criminal charges. But the real victory was in the changes that followed. New oversight procedures were implemented, whistleblower protections were strengthened, and most importantly, a culture of accountability replaced the fear-based leadership that Carter had cultivated. 6 months after the revelation of her identity, Iris was working a regular shift at Walter Reed when she received an unexpected visitor. A young woman in civilian clothes, but with the bearing of military personnel, approached the nurse's station. "Gunnery Sergeant Delilah?" she asked hesitantly. "Just Iris here," Iris replied. "How can I help you?" The woman's composure cracked slightly. "I'm Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Navy Nurse Corps. I'm being stationed at Kandahar next month, and I'll be the only medical officer for a forward operating base. I heard about your training program, but I'm not special operations. I was hoping, could you teach me?" Unofficially? Iris studied the young woman, seeing herself from years ago, eager, scared, determined to make a difference. "When do you deploy?" 4 weeks, ma'am." "Then we'd better get started. Be at the training room at 0500 tomorrow. Bring comfortable clothes and a strong stomach. We'll be working with pig carcasses." Sarah's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much." As Sarah left, Hazel appeared beside Iris. "You can't help yourself, can you? Always teaching, always preparing others." "It's what I do," Iris replied simply. "No," Hazel corrected. "It's who you are." That evening, Iris stood in her small apartment, looking at 2 photographs on her dresser. One showed her in dress blues, standing with her Force Recon unit in Afghanistan. The other, taken just yesterday, showed her with the latest class of Delilah Protocol graduates, past and present, warrior and healer, separate but finally whole. Her phone rang, showing a blocked number. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" "Gunny, this is Admiral Stevens, JSOC." The voice was official, urgent. "We have a situation in Mumbai. American embassy personnel are trapped in a medical facility that's under siege. Local forces can't breach without massive casualties. We need someone who can provide medical support while also being able to defend themselves and others if necessary." Iris felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the call to action she'd thought she'd never hear again. "I'm not active duty, Admiral. You're in the inactive reserves, and I'm activating you now. This is voluntary, of course, but we need someone with your unique skill set, combat medicine expertise combined with special operations training." She looked at the photographs again, at the 2 versions of herself that had finally merged into one. "When?" "Wheels up in 3 hours from Andrews. You'll be briefed en route. I need to make some calls, arrange coverage at the hospital." "Already done. Colonel Anderson has been notified, and Dr. Priscilla will cover your shifts. The only question is whether you're willing." Iris thought about the comfortable life she'd built, the safety of routine, the peace of anonymity. Then she thought about American citizens trapped and needing help, about skills she possessed that could make the difference between life and death. "I'll need my gear," she said, already waiting at Andrews. "Welcome back, Gunny." She hung up and immediately called Hazel. "I need to take some time off." "The Mumbai situation?" Hazel asked, somehow not surprised. "Anderson already called me. How long?" "Unknown. Maybe a week, maybe longer." "Iris," Hazel said softly, "be careful. You've already sacrificed enough." "A Marine never stops serving," Iris replied. "They just sometimes change battlefields." 2 hours later, she stood on the tarmac at Andrews Air Force Base, looking at the military transport that would take her back into the world she'd left behind. But this time, she wasn't going as Gunnery Sergeant Delilah, Force Recon Marine, or as Iris the Hidden Nurse. She was going as herself, all of herself, for the first time. Connor Ryan appeared beside her, dressed in tactical gear. "Didn't think you'd go without backup, did you?" "This isn't your mission," she said, though she was glad to see him. "It is now. My team's been assigned to support." Turns out, having a combat medic who can also kick ass is useful in hostage situations. As they boarded the aircraft, Iris felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Complete alignment between who she was and what she was doing. No more hiding, no more pretending to be less than she was. The aircraft lifted off into the night sky, carrying her toward another crisis, another chance to save lives. But this time, she wasn't running from her past or hiding from her identity. She was embracing all of it: the warrior, the healer, the teacher, the protector. As the lights of Washington fell away below, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it to find a simple text. Semper Fi, Gunny. Give them hell. Rodriguez. She smiled, remembering the captain whose life she'd saved what seemed like a lifetime ago, but was only months past. That single action had started a chain of events that exposed corruption, saved countless lives, and ultimately restored her identity. You good? Connor asked, noticing her expression. Yeah, Iris replied, looking out at the dark ocean below. For the first time in 5 years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The mission to Mumbai would be classified, its details never making the news. But in the special operations community, the story would be told for years: how a combat medic successfully treated 12 casualties while simultaneously neutralizing 7 hostile threats, all while coordinating the evacuation of 36 embassy personnel. The official report would list her as Medical Specialist Delilah, attached to SEAL Team 4. But everyone who was there would know the truth, that Gunnery Sergeant Iris Delilah, the ghost of Kandahar, the instructor who revolutionized combat medicine, had once again proven that warriors never truly retire. They just find new ways to serve. Upon her return from Mumbai, Iris found Walter Reed transformed. News of her successful mission had somehow leaked, despite its classified nature, and the staff treated her with a mixture of awe and deep respect. But she deflected attention, focusing on her work, on teaching, on continuing to save lives one patient at a time. The Delilah protocol expanded rapidly, with military medical personnel from allied nations requesting slots in the program. The techniques she taught, born from desperate necessity in combat zones, were being adapted for civilian trauma medicine, potentially saving thousands more lives. One evening, as she finished a training session with a new group of combat medics, one of them asked, "Ma'am, do you ever regret the path that brought you here, the sacrifice of your military career?" Iris considered the question. Every path has its purpose. I thought my career was over when they forced me to disappear, but those 5 years of being just a nurse taught me humility, patience, and the value of serving without recognition. They made me a better teacher, a better medic, and hopefully a better person. Besides, she added with a rare smile, a Marine doesn't retire. We just find different ways to complete the mission. Her phone buzzed. Another blocked number. Another crisis somewhere in the world that needed her unique skills. She looked at her students, young medics who would soon face their own life and death decisions in combat zones around the world. Class dismissed, she said. Study the arterial pressure point charts. We'll be practicing rapid hemorrhage control tomorrow. As they filed out, she answered the phone. Delilah here. Gunny, we have a situation. She listened to the briefing, already mentally preparing for another mission. Because that's what she did. That's who she was. A Marine, a medic, a teacher, a warrior who had learned that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when not to fight, and the greatest courage is continuing to serve even when the world tells you your service isn't wanted. The cycle continued: hospital shifts, training sessions, occasional classified missions that no one would ever hear about. But now, she did it all as herself, fully integrated, no longer hiding behind a false identity or diminished role. Late one night, after a particularly difficult surgery where they'd saved 3 soldiers from an IED attack, Hazel found her on the hospital roof, looking out at the city lights. No regrets? Hazel asked. None, Iris replied. Every experience, every sacrifice, every moment of hiding, and every moment of revelation, they all led here, to a place where I can make a difference both in the shadows and in the light. And Carter? Any satisfaction in his downfall? Iris shook her head. Carter was a symptom, not the disease. There will always be people who abuse power, who put profit over lives. My job isn't to celebrate their failures, but to ensure their victims survive and thrive. Her phone rang one more time. This time, it wasn't a blocked number, but a video call from Camp Pendleton. The latest class of Delilah Protocol graduates appeared on screen, all of them in dress uniform, all of them saluting. Thank you, Gunny, they said in unison, for showing us that saving lives sometimes requires breaking the rules. She returned their salute, then ended the call. Tomorrow, there would be more students to train, more patients to treat, possibly another crisis that needed her unique skills. But tonight, standing on the roof of the hospital where her journey had truly begun, Gunnery Sergeant Iris Delilah, Marine, medic, teacher, and survivor, was exactly where she belonged. The warrior who had been forced to hide had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever, not because she had reclaimed her identity, but because she had learned that identity isn't about what others call you or what uniform you wear. It's about who you choose to be when no one is watching and what you're willing to sacrifice to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. Always.